And on the psychological side of the challenges, when you first meet an individual, do you kind of profile them in a certain way, or you think this person is going to respond to a positive stimulus, or kind of they're looking to, they'll be more motivated by avoiding a negative outcome? Is that something, do you do that kind of profiling when you first meet?
And interesting enough, it's very difficult to do when you first meet. It's very difficult to profile people psychologically. I think, I do an awful lot of physiological profiling, so I can bring them into my lab and we can assess various different determinants of performance, like aerobic endurance, anaerobic endurance, anaerobic capacity, those sort of things. But psychologically, it's a much more difficult task, because often what you're looking for is what their response under stress will be, their response under pressure. And that's something very difficult to do on a questionnaire.
Yeah.
And so what I tend to do is actually evolve my thinking about them. You have to be very careful not to make an assumption. That's a really bad place to be, is assume that somebody's going to respond in a certain way. But what training is about, people often think that training is all about the physiological, it's all about the physical, but it's not. It's actually about the emotional, psychological, it's also about the technical. And so what I'm doing with training is that we're evolving an understanding of what the individual is and what works best for them. And so therefore the type of feedback that they require, the type of motivation they may require, all of those things become very bespoke to the individual.
And is there priming that you do before a challenge, so that they have some mantra or positive self-talk, or something that they can repeat, or a place they can go to at the most challenging points of the event?
Definitely is the answer to that. I think there's a couple of areas really. One is, I think that I work on this thing I call the Central Motivator.
Okay.
There's got to be one reason why they're doing it.
Yeah.
It's quite a difficult thing for these guys, because often they're doing a challenge that they never thought they would ever do, because they've been asked to do it, and they've been asked to do it for charity to raise money, and so it's not been a lifelong dream of them to run 43 marathons in 51 days or swim the length of the Thames. They're doing it for other reasons. But identifying the one reason why they're doing it, and that is interesting, it changes. So for David, I've worked with him on 4 challenges now. The Central Motivator has been different every time. It does tend to be, for David, it does tend to be the people that he is raising money for. So a young lad called Philip, when we swam the Thames, for example, and a young girl that we met in Ethiopia for swimming the Channel. I remember Davina used a young girl that she met whose job every day was to smash rocks into smaller rocks in order to make enough money to eat. Oh. And when you meet people like that, they're really powerful motivators. So I work closely on that to understand what is the key thing that we can use. We don't use it all the time, we just drip it in at those really important, those really low points, really, just as a reminder of why we're actually out there. And then equally, it's actually about things like understanding the challenge. I think, I've got this great moment with David when we swam the Channel, and I took him open water swimming for the first time in cold open water, and it was enlightening to David about how miserable cold open water can be. But that's quite an important point, because I think you do have to understand the challenge. You have to respect the challenge. And I think if you go in thinking it's going to be easy, then it's a very bad place to be, because generally what happens is people who think it's going to be easy, they don't commit to the work that's required to deliver success. I think understanding how tough it's going to be very early on is really important to make sure that you do the work to optimize success at the end.
I remember in the documentary, I think that was David's first real taste of how hard it was going to be, and I think I remember you saying that it actually changed the way he phrased the challenge after that. He said, "I'm going to attempt to swim the Channel."
Absolutely.
Whereas
right.
before that, he was saying, "I'm going to do it."
Yeah.
So it's that shock of reality that put a little, not an element of doubt, but the element of this is how hard it's going to be.
Yeah.
I have to take
reality.
it so seriously. Yeah.
And they are reality checks. I think it is important, actually, because again, what you're doing with these guys is you're putting them into an environment they have never been in before.
Yeah.
The vast majority of them have never, David will tell you, but there's plenty of them who said, they didn't really enjoy PE at school, they don't really do sport of any nature. So actually it's really incongruous, the challenge themselves. And what they are doing is that they're pushing themselves to the absolute physical limit. Yeah. And actually because of that, the psychologic and emotional limit as well, for the very first time. So to some extent, my job invariably with these challenges, I do it with them. The one thing that you can't give people is experience. I can get them prepared optimally, but you can't build an experience because they've never done it before. And really my job during the challenge itself is to actually just to provide that comfort blanket of experience, to identify when things might not be going as well as they should be, to identify when we should be stopping, when we should be going again. All of those things, just to enable them to focus on what they're doing, which is something really enormous and something unique.
Yeah. And I've heard you talk about your if-then protocols. So is that something that you, even with the psychology, you say, if something goes wrong at this stage, I know exactly what to say?
Yeah.
Is that something that comes more spontaneously when there's a crisis moment, or do you know ahead of time what you'd say?
Do you know, I think, again, sort of my job is to understand that. I mean, what I do is I take the challenge and dissect it down to its component parts.
Yeah.
An intricate approach, really. And really, by doing that, what you're doing is you're identifying the risks. In essence, we know that if you want to walk from Hull to Liverpool, as Joe did, or if you want to swim the Channel, or if you're doing the Arc to Arch, or Greg James, 5 triathlons in 5 seas, you know what's required to be successful. You know what the elements are that are needed. But equally, what you have to think about is what are the risks that are going to stop you from achieving that challenge. And what you need to do is create a plan. And I create a plan. We call it an if-then plan. Is that if something happens that risks the success of the challenge, then this is what I'm going to do. So it's the if and then. And in doing that, what you should be able to do is actually cover just about every potential negative event that may occur during a challenge. But obviously there are things that happen that are way beyond your control. I remember we swam the Thames and a dog jumped in on top of David.
Oh, really?
At one point,
Jumped in.
just randomly saw him in the water. But yeah, I'll have some of that. And jumped in on top of him. I didn't have that in my if-then plan, funnily enough. Yeah. But so there are elements to that, and also there are things like the things that are out with your control. So the weather, for example. I remember with Davina's challenge. I mean, the weather was utterly horrendous for the first few days, and what you are doing is you're adapting that approach constantly. So it's a moving feast. It's not set in stone, but certainly what it should be. There should be a framework of how you're going to work and how you're going to operate around it.